Hey, it's Concrete. So this is the 9th and final video in my Flavorah beta testing series. Today we're going to go over their Apple, which is a re-release, and then I have their Sugar Orchid, their Cherry Blossom, and their Sun Cookie. And again, for the last time, here's a disclaimer for the Flavorah flavors. I didn't pay for these. But I'm excited. I hope you're excited. Let's dive right in. So first I have their Apple. Okay, so this is the flavor that's a re-release. So this was originally in production. Apparently they stopped production because of some sort of shortage of a certain volatile, and this is coming back. So hey, we might as well include a review for it. So for this apple, I do get like a nice blend of sort of a red apple sweetness and a green apple tartness. I'd say it reminds me more of like an apple juice flavor rather than like a specific apple. It has a nice sweetness to it. I think it does like a normal sort of baseline apple juice sweetness really well, and then that tartar green accent isn't quite as overbearing as some straight green apples. It just works really nice to kind of set off that sweeter apple body. So if you were going to be using it for an apple juice, though, I do find that it gets a little bit dry on me. It doesn't quite have that like wet apple juice mouthfeel that you want, so it's kind of like powdered apple juice, which, you know, is interesting. But the flavor is pretty solid. I do get a little bit of grassiness on that green apple, especially just right after a shake. And there's green apples tend to have just like a little bit of almost a butyric kind of edge to them. Thankfully this one steeps out pretty quick. I tried it fresh, and then trying it after like 7 days, I didn't really notice a whole lot of that butyric edge in there. The relative prominence of that green apple really depends on what percentage you are mixing at. I think at lower percentages, this concentrate tends to sort of lead with the green apple because you don't have much of that like red apple body in there. And I think if you were going to use it lower, what you would primarily get is like a tart green apple accent. I think you could probably bump this up to about 1.5%, somewhere around there, for like for just a fairly realistic green apple. It doesn't really go all, it's sweet, but it doesn't go like all Jolly Ranchers on you. If you did want to use this as like a primary apple juice flavor by itself, I would probably start cranking the percentage up more like 3 or 4%. Honestly, that's kind of where some of that sweeter body comes in. There are a lot of apple concentrates, and even saying there are a lot, that's kind of an understatement. I think the one this reminds me the most of is probably Innoware's 2 Apples, but Innoware's 2 Apples is a little bit more aggressive, maybe a little bit less dry. I think this is going to be primarily useful in sort of using an apple when you want some apple sweetness and body without necessarily adding a whole bunch of moisture, and you want those like green apple top notes. I'd look at stuff like apple ciders or maybe some bakeries. I think it's a pretty solid apple overall. So the next 2 flavors are kind of interesting. They both kind of remind me of a Cherry Blossom, but only one's named Cherry Blossom. I'm going to start with the Sugar Orchid first. So the big Cherry Blossom competition would end up being TPA's Cherry Blossom, and it's kind of colored my response to these 2 flavors. So the Sugar Orchid's interesting. Mostly what I get from it is a sort of floral vanilla flavor with a like lighter cherry accent to it, and that's kind of where the comparison to TPA's Cherry Blossom comes in, because I get sort of that chalky, almost candy sweetness with that light cherry vibe. It sort of reminds me of that. That floral vanilla there is actually pretty interesting. It's like if you took the floral notes from like a really bright commercial sort of vanilla flavor and you just isolated some of those fruity and floral notes. That's what I'm getting off of it. In terms of the actual orchid part of this, like, it doesn't really taste like it's leafy or vegetal to me. It mostly just tastes like a really interesting floral vanilla with a hint of cherry. It's definitely a stronger concentrate. So doing my percentage testing, I wasn't really having a whole lot of fun vaping this over like 0.25%, 0.5%. Up any higher than that, I feel like that cherry note kind of turns into sort of a generic, sort of harsh red candy note. I like to keep it a little bit lower, and it definitely feels like an additive to me. It feels like a really interesting sort of lightly floral additive for like brighter fruits. I think you could use it a lot of the places that you end up using cherry blossom, and I think it's going to work pretty well. It's definitely interesting. I could see maybe pairing it with tobaccos, but I think it's one that you'll probably be more interested in if like those kind of cherry blossom or herbal flavors are your thing. I think it'd go well with teas, stuff like that. But the problem that I had was this tasted so much like cherry blossom, and they also put out a flavor called cherry blossom at the same time. So here is their cherry blossom. So if their Sugar Orchid kind of reminds me of the way that TPA's Cherry Blossom works, their actual Cherry Blossom kind of reminds me of what I think eating an actual cherry blossom would be like. It's not bad by any means. It has sort of an interesting bright green leafy taste. When you're kind of breaking down those like vegetation tastes, I kind of split them into two camps. I have like bright green and leafy, which I don't mind, and then there's like warm and kind of swampy. This is definitely on the bright green and leafy side. The cherry here is nice. It's very subtle. It depends a whole lot on percentage, how much cherry you're going to get out of it. I find that sort of leafy green flavor comes in a lot earlier than the cherry does. Like down at 1%, I mostly just taste like that sort of lightly floral leafy green flavor, and then you start moving up to like 2 and 3%, and that cherry keeps coming in. I'd say you have to get up to about 3% before this really feels cherry forward. Underneath that, it just kind of feels like a light accent, but it's a really nice cherry flavor. Honestly, it's pretty mellow. It's a little bit thin, a little bit floral, but it doesn't really have too much in the way of like cherry weirdness that you get with a lot of cherries. And I've seen people sort of defend TPA's Cherry Blossom as, oh, hey, here's a cherry that doesn't taste weird. But TPA's Cherry Blossom actually does end up picking up a good deal of medicinal notes, and this doesn't really do it. So in terms of where you'd end up using this, just because Sugar Orchid reminded me so much of part of a cherry blossom flavor, and this is obviously another part of a cherry blossom flavor, I actually made up a pretty decent cherry blossom, taking 2% of the cherry blossom and 0.25% of the Sugar Orchid. And it gave me like a nice, sweet, well-balanced cherry blossom that actually had like a good amount of body to it. So if you're super into cherry blossoms, if you pick up these two and mix them, it actually works really well. For this cherry blossom, because it's a little bit more herbal, I think you can use it most of the same places that you would end up using Sugar Orchid or TPA's Cherry Blossom. It's just the end result's going to end up being a little bit more floral. So I would go ahead and stick with like berries and fruits that take a floral edge a little bit better. I think you could go ahead and try to fight it and throw a bunch of syrupy fruit in it, but honestly, I'd kind of just use it where it feels more comfortable. And then if the Sugar Orchid's going to work well in green teas and stuff and black teas, I think this will also work really well in those kind of profiles, but I think it's going to sort of accentuate the earthiness and the floral quality of those green teas. So it might be a good cherry blossom to reach for if you're trying to go for like a more accurate cherry blossom in like your tea recipes. I could also see this working in cocktails with gins and bourbons and all sorts of other fun stuff. But yeah, two very interesting flavors. And for me, at least, they work a lot better put together. But I think individually, they'll each have their own uses. So the last flavor I have to go over, and the last flavor in general, out of this pre-release batch, is Flavorah Sun Cookie. So the first big question, what is a sun cookie? I did get some clarification on this. So the profile is supposed to be like an Isolani which I'm not sure how you actually pronounce that, but an Isolani style cookie. And as far as I can tell, that's sort of a reference back to a 5 Ponds juice called Isolani, which is supposed to be a lemon glazed sugar cookie. And that's definitely sort of the vein that they went in with this. The actual cookie base, I know I've said that, you know, Flavorah bakeries tend to need a little bit extra AP. This one actually feels pretty solid right off the bat. I get like a medium cook on the cookie. It's not as soft and fluffy as like Capella's sugar cookie, but it's also not like as sort of hard and crispy and almost burnt as like Flavor Art's cookie. Yeah, pretty solid cookie note there. I do get, and especially at higher percentages, I do get like a little bit of, I want to say like nuttiness out of it that has a little bit of like an earthy green edge to it. It's not major, but it does get a little bit distracting up against everything else going on here. I think you kind of accentuate that nuttiness a little bit with like a different nut flavor, and I think it kind of make the cookie a little bit crisper, and I think the actual like adding some nuts that weren't quite as green would kind of work to accentuate the profile quite a bit, so I might look into doing that. The lemon here is pretty solid. So it's definitely a lemon flavored cookie. You're not getting around that lemon. There's a lot of lemon in there. It does have a good sort of tart lemon to it, and I can pick out just like a little bit of zest too. It honestly feels like something like a lemon curd, but without really like the mouthfeel, the texture that I expect. It's that kind of like bright, tart, saturated lemon flavor though. I don't think it's going to be a big issue, but at the very tail end, I do pick up like maybe a little bit of anise, especially if I've like taken this to a higher percentage. I don't think it's like as bad as the anise note that you get off some of the Flavor Art lemon bakeries, but it's in there, and if I didn't say anything, somebody would come back after me. It would be terrible. So technically, yeah, I do get a little tiny bit of anise at the back end, but honestly, it blends in pretty well with that lemon note. I don't find it like overwhelming at all. Sweetness level on this is actually really good. I think it's going to work really well actually as a solo flavor, and I don't feel like Flavorah has a lot of concentrates that really works super well as a solo flavor, but to me this feels really well put together as a solo flavor. I'd probably go between 2 and 3%, and you get some nice bright lemon, you get some cookie base to it, a couple minimal off notes, but that's really not a huge deal. And yeah, I would totally see rocking this as a solo flavor. I think if you were going to be using it to mix with, I think you'd want to go for lemon bakeries, because I don't think you're going to get around the lemon or the bakery here. And so I think like lemon bars would be, this would be a really good base for a lemon bar flavor. Maybe with a little bit of additional crust in there or something to kind of fluff out that lemon note, like Inawera lemon or even FA's lemon Sicily or something. And then I think it'd work really well for lemon meringue pies too. And I know that there's like pre-done lemon meringue pie concentrates, and everybody has their own lemon meringue recipe, but if you really want to try to trailblaze there, I think this would be an excellent base for some lemon meringue. I'd probably use it around like 1.5, 2% in there in those kind of applications. I think also if you wanted to add some more cookie flavor into it, I think you can get a softer kind of sugar cookie base if you use Capella's sugar cookie, and if you use like Flavor Art's cookie, I think you could get like a crispier cookie. You then go back in, add some like Flavorah frosting or Inawera Shisha vanilla or something to sort of fluff up that lemon frosting note. And I think you can get a pretty good lemon iced cookie out of this too. So yeah, it's I guess a fairly complicated concentrate that's going to be a little bit easier to sort of just use as a primary note in something and sort of modify, but overall it's actually really solid. So those are all 27 Flavorah pre-release flavors and the extra one release flavor. So I feel like celebrating. I'm going to go ahead and crack a Magnum of Shasta Club Soda here. That didn't go well. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. In a couple days, I'll go ahead and have another video out talking about my favorite flavors out of this batch and sort of how I use Flavorah flavors and my sort of philosophy on mixing with Flavorah. But hey, thank you for watching. Thanks for sticking around for the entire series. I appreciate it. I'll catch you later.